Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Monday, May 12th, day 584 of the war. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our U.S. Bureau Chief, Jacob Magid. Hi, Jacob. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda. Good to be with you again.
It is an exciting day. All of Israel is on tenterhooks as Hamas has stated that in a quote-unquote act of good faith, it will release the final living U.S.-Israeli hostage, Edan Alexander, at some point this afternoon. This comes ahead of U.S. President Donald Trump's trip to the Mideast, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates. So will this be enough to stave off the impending Gaza Strip operation? We don't know the answer to that yet, but we will hear about the back channels leading up to the potential, we hope, the promised release of Edan Alexander this afternoon. So all of this and much more after the break. Starting rather early yesterday, there were rumors swirling about the release of Edan Alexander coming from reported leaks from the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office, and then it was later confirmed by some Arab leaders. And then Hamas came out with a statement saying that it will indeed release hostage Edan Alexander. Edan is, of course, a U.S. citizen as well. He is a lone soldier here in Israel, and he was taken on October 7th, 2023, along with 251 other hostages into the Gaza Strip. All the other American citizens who were taken on that day are now dead, either killed by Hamas on October 7th or in captivity. So, Jacob, tell us what you know about the efforts leading up to this at least promised release.
So there are still a lot of details that I don't have confirmed, but I have spoken to one source involved in the effort to try to get Edan Alexander home, and then another Palestinian official who's also was able to confirm some of these details. My understanding is that this release was the result of a back channel that has been held over the past about a month or so between an individual who passed along messages between Hamas leadership and U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. And basically, what this individual tried to do over the past few weeks was convince Hamas to simply release Alexander unconditionally, arguing that this would be a step of goodwill, a gesture of goodwill that would go a long way with the Trump administration. It would even possibly open up the door for all kinds of conversations that Hamas wants to have about specifically ending the war, resuming humanitarian aid that hasn't been going in for over 2 months, and ending the war in a way that all the hostages are released at once. Now, this is something that Netanyahu has not wanted to do because that leaves Hamas in power, he argues. That has led to a stalemate that we've seen for many, many months, and I think that's where this back channel came in handy, where it was, let's just focus on getting one hostage out, someone that the President Trump very much cares about. For the first few weeks of this back channel, Hamas still tried to say we want to have conditions on the release of Alexander, just like the talks that took place in March with Adam Boehler, the Trump envoy, when he was meeting with Hamas directly. And basically, the back channel operator said, "Look, it's now or never. Trump is coming to the region on he's leaving for the region on Monday. Israel is threatening to launch a massive uptick in its military operations once he leaves on Friday. Now is your chance. Otherwise, the door might be closed, Hamas, if you don't take this right now." On Friday, I was told that the individual was updated by Hamas that they are willing to unconditionally release Alexander. But but they still needed to find him. They claimed that they didn't know where he was. This is, if you remember, last month Hamas published this propaganda video of Edan Alexander, and then 2 days later it said we lost contact with the captors due to an Israeli strike. Saturday, they say we've located him, we're ready to move forward. And basically, there was a message passed along by the individual to Hamas, again, to get in touch with Qatar's prime minister. And the deal was basically finalized through him. And then Witkoff was notified following by the Qatari prime minister, Atani. And then only afterwards did Israel really formally get notified by Witkoff through Netanyahu we called and Ron Dermer as well to let them know of this development. I think Israel, my understanding, had an understanding that some of this effort was underway but didn't have specific details. Wasn't really updated by the U.S. until after the fact, partially because it was really this mediator, my understanding, not a government official, that was doing some really the heavy lifting in this effort. I'm sure there'll be lots of people who are going to be trying to take credit in the coming days. Even Trump in his announcement mentioned Qatar and Egypt. My understanding is that they didn't play as much of a role here, and that this really was something that a lot of people didn't expect until now. So now we're talking Monday, hopefully at some point during the latter half of the day, that he'll be released. Edan Alexander, you have his parents coming to Israel right now, as we're recording well after midnight in the US, early morning in America. They're on a plane with Adam Bowler, who is the hostage envoy for the Trump administration, and they're hoping to be reunited with their son later today.
Right. Early morning in Israel, very late at night in the U.S. And I think no one is surprised that Hamas is trying to curry the favor of Trump. Obviously, when he's in the region, this is an amazing photo op and Trump can take credit. Netanyahu, for his part, is, of course, stating that it's the military buildup. And honestly, there are dozens and dozens of tanks waiting to go into Gaza. Many of the tanks have been moved from the north to the south. Israel is poised to start this very large operation in the Gaza Strip. So it's quite possible that both can take some kind of credit for pressure. As you mentioned, Edan Alexander's parents are on their way here. And of course, that leaves up to 23 other parents who are waiting for signs of life of their children, for one thing, but also who are waiting for their release. And it is a very tense moment here in Israel as we await Edan's return, because obviously we have had disappointments in the past when it comes to Hamas promises of releases and those who actually did return in the end. Let's turn to a report that U.S. envoy to the Mideast Steve Witkoff is basically signaling displeasure with Netanyahu's planned buildup and planned operation in the Gaza Strip. There was a report on Channel 12 News that Witkoff told hostage families that, quote, Israel is prolonging the war, even though we do not see where further progress can be made. And Jacob, is this signaling some kind of trouble in paradise? This, of course, comes after the U.S. brokered a deal with the Houthis, leaving Israel out of it. And, of course, the U.S. is conducting direct talks with Iran for a deal that Israel obviously does not support. So, trouble in paradise. What do you think?
I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think a lot of these reports, and definitely those people who are echoing them, are part of this camp that have argued that Netanyahu has been ineffective. And they point to this newest example of this deal happening kind of above Netanyahu's head. And even Trump in his announcement doesn't even mention Israel at all. He just talks about Edan Alexander trying to end this war, getting out all of the hostages, almost kind of falling in line with what Hamas is calling for as well. In that kind of frame, that kind of exchange in Netanyahu to date is rejected. But I think that there's a bit of a rush to excitement from those folks who are echoing these reports. I do recognize that President Trump is probably a little bit fed up with Netanyahu, according to sources I've spoken with in the administration and beyond. But I think there's still like a goalpost for what the Trump administration recognizes it can do regarding Israel, and that, yes, they're willing to step away and kind of be a bit more independent than the Israeli government would like, and I think the Israeli government, Prime Minister Netanyahu has expressed to his allies that he would like to be a little bit more in touch with Trump administration officials and not be learning of things in the media. But it doesn't mean the Trump administration is simply going to abandon Israel. I think reports that Trump is about to recognize a Palestinian state are very inaccurate and premature. I think there could be some developments on the Saudi normalization front when Trump arrives in Riyadh on Tuesday, I believe it'll be. But I don't think we're having a deal tomorrow. I don't think that there's going to be a agreement with Saudi Arabia to allow them to have a civilian nuclear facility tomorrow. I think that those things are going to take time. But I think what the message Israel's getting in general is that if you don't come up with solutions and have a real strategy for what you want to do in Gaza, beyond simply win or take over or dismantle Hamas, like what is your end goal? I think the Trump administration is simply going to move on and look at other options.
Let's go to a short break and then discuss the upcoming Mideast trip of the Trump administration.
Israel Bonds, the heartbeat of solidarity, the powerhouse of support. When the Israeli-Hamas war hit, Israel Bonds stood tall, proving we're more than just an investment, we're a lifeline. Israel Bonds pledges to ensure Israel thrives and flourishes. Investing in Israel Bonds isn't just a financial move, it's a declaration for resilience, strength, and a better future for Israel. Join us and let solidarity echo through generations.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our U.S. Bureau Chief, Jacob Magid. Jacob, Trump's plane is meant to take off on Monday about mid-morning, and he's set to have a meeting with the Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, in Riyadh on Tuesday, as far as we know. And there are reports that this meeting is set to include Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun, and Syria's new leader, Ahmed al-Sharaa. So this was reported by Arabic media. We don't yet quite know if this is going to happen, but what do you see the signaling, at least, that Trump is ready to meet with all of these leaders?
I'm a bit skeptical of that kind of summit. There is supposed to be a summit of Gulf leaders with Trump. I think that's where more of the focus of the Trump administration is with this trip, and that's actually what Ambassador Mike Huckabee talked about when he was asked that this is not a snubbing of Israel, that it wasn't involved. My understanding at this point is that plans of a broader leadership meeting are a little bit premature. But the goal is to really advance the U.S. relations with the Gulf, and at a bilateral level and at a multilateral level. There's all these sorts of economic deals that the Trump administration is hoping to sign. There's a lot of investments that the Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates are willing to make in various fields, including AI, that I think are going to likely be announced. And that I think most of these meetings will actually be at the bilateral level. But again, there's a lot that the Trump administration is keeping its cards close to its chest. I think things are going to be likely announced last minute. There'll be lots of surprises because it's President Trump. I'm sure the Arab leaders are looking to have maybe as much of these meetings take place behind closed doors and maybe have the press engagement to be somewhat limited, but there's no telling once Trump's in front of reporters, what he might end up saying and announcing whether or not these leaders are expecting it or want it. Even if they're the ones hosting, I think when Trump is in the room, he kind of sucks up all the attention, and likely there will be surprises that they're not looking for. It's noteworthy that I did speak with an Arab official who said there's been messages that the Saudi government is asked to pass along to the Trump administration that he don't make announcements specifically regarding Saudi normalization, which I don't think Riyadh is ready at this point to sign tomorrow, absent an end to the war and a pathway to a Palestinian state. But those two things seem a bit far right now. Again, hopefully Edan Alexander is a springboard to maybe a larger deal, but we're not there yet.
When you're talking about Saudi normalization, of course, you're talking about Saudi normalization with Israel, which was definitely a talking point just ahead of the October 7th massacre by Hamas, and arguably one of the reasons for the timing of the October 7th onslaught. And it is difficult to imagine that the Saudis would disengage from the war and continue with this normalization. But it isn't so far-fetched to think that Trump would take out the Israel piece from it, which means essentially, you tell us what it means. It has to do with aid, military aid and cooperation and things of that nature. So what would Saudi normalization look like without Israel normalization?
Yeah, I mean when I say normalization, I'm referring definitely to the Saudi normalization with Israel. I think what Saudi Arabia has tried to do, or even since the end of the Biden administration, is try to reach agreements with the U.S. that maybe fall short of the security treaty that they were hoping to achieve. I think there was a recognition that that kind of treaty that gives these defense guarantees that the U.S. will come to Saudi Arabia's defense if it's under attack under certain conditions, that would need two-thirds of the Senate's approval, something that's very difficult to get. And the way to put that over the finish line was to have a component of it be, is Saudi Arabia agreeing to normalize with Israel? But given that that doesn't seem so likely right now, Saudi Arabia is saying, let's try to make other agreements. There was a large package that was being put together. It included talk about a civilian nuclear program for the Saudis to be able to establish. And it included a lot of weapons deals and other economic agreements that the Saudi Arabia and the U.S. was looking to do, and also the U.S. was hoping that Saudi Arabia would agree to maybe delink its relationship a bit more with China, given the U.S. concerns about the sharing of technology there. And I think Saudi Arabia is hoping right now, and they do see an opening with this Trump administration, that while is not abandoning Israel, does feel that they can't allow this current government to be a stumbling or an obstacle to the economic progress that the U.S. wants to make in the Gulf and elsewhere. So I think those will be the kinds of agreements that will be discussed.
Let's add one more factor in the mix, and that is, of course, that the U.S. is conducting direct talks with Iran, and another, I think the fourth set happened yesterday in Oman, and there was no kind of breakthrough as far as we understand. But I do wonder how this Saudi, Qatar, and United Arab Emirates trip will potentially affect these direct negotiations, because it appears to me that Trump is very hands-on in terms of what he expects to happen or even what he's willing to give up in these talks. So do you think that we might see some kind of pivot in the Iran negotiations as well after this trip?
I don't know about pivot. I just think that Trump likely takes the counsel of these leaders in the Gulf, of these three countries, very, very seriously, especially because they're putting their money where their mouth is. And as a result, I think their perspective is going to be something that sticks with him once he leaves. And my understanding is that that each of these countries have a slight nuance to how they see the Iranian nuclear issue, with I guess you could say Qatar being the most, but still not completely aligned with Iran. Saudi Arabia and UAE a lot less so. However, those two countries, I think, took a shift in their approach in recent years, where they were used to be much more, I think, aligned with Israel on this more willingness to have conflict with Iran, because they don't trust the regime there. However, the shift that we've seen is that they're now, I think, taking an approach that they've normalized their relation, or Saudi Arabia, for example, has normalized ties, and UAE is much more engaged with Iran because they feel that they've tried the more combative approach to Iran, and it didn't help, and they still faced attacks from Iran's proxies that were threats to their national security. And they feel like engagement with Iran, as much as they don't completely trust Iran, that will be a more effective strategy. And as a result, I think they're a bit hesitant about the concept of an Israeli attack on Iran, because they feel that they'll be the ones to suffer the blows from Iranian proxies as a result, that even if Iran doesn't strike Israel immediately afterwards, that they will likely, the Houthis or other proxies will then target Saudi or Emirati security sites. And that's something they're very concerned about, even if, again, I really don't think that means that they trust Iran by any means. So I think that will be kind of the message of maybe encouraging more engagement with Iran through these diplomatic efforts, even if that means that we don't trust them. There'll have to be a verification process, and that's something that Trump has talked about as well. But I think that is the approach that these countries will try to relay to President Trump during his meetings, and we'll see if that sticks with him afterwards.
Obviously, check out our live blog for more updates on Edan Alexander, first and foremost, and the Trump trip to the Mideast. Jacob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Amanda.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.